Hello Facebookers, it's Steve Barrett here, Editorial Director of PR Week. Delighted to be doing our podcast, weekly podcast. Different time this week, we had a late cancellation, so our guest Dan Hill has very kindly stepped in. Thank you for doing that, Dan, and welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here. Going to chat with Dan about crisis PR generally, and also boxing promotion, which is another part of his, interesting part of his day to day. And we got Frank with us. Frank Washkuch. How you doing, Frank?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on.
It's always a pleasure, mate. Wouldn't be the same without you. And we got Sean and Mickey behind the dials. So yeah, going to start when I get the signal. Yeah, leave some comments. Tell us what you think. Try and be nice. I know it's social media, but let's have a productive dialogue. And any questions or comments on what Dan says or what we say, we'd love to hear from you.
Pick up.
Hello and welcome to the PR Week, PR Week's regular weekly roundup of everything that matters in the worlds of PR and communications. My name's Steve Barrett. I'm the Editorial Director of PR Week. Going to guide you through the next 35 minutes as we do our weekly podcast with Dan Hill, who's the CEO and founder of Hill Impact. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm great, Steve. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you here, and thank you for stepping in. A last minute signing up for the show, so really looking forward to chatting to you. We got Frank Washkuch here. He's our news director. How you doing, Frank?
I'm doing all right. Thanks.
Just all right?
Well, better than all right.
You've had a busy morning, haven't you?
Yeah.
Every morning's busy.
A few meetings here and there.
Indeed, but and a bit of work, proper work. We'll talk to Dan, and then we'll talk about some newsy issues. Oscar Suris has a new job at Zeno. We'll talk about the HHS suspending a contract with Porto-Novelli. And the winners of our bracket, most importantly, who won the most memorable brand tagline in our basketball-style brand bracket. We'll find out about that later. But Dan, let's start with you. Tell us about Hill Impact and what sort of work you do and what your specialisms are.
This is a challenge running a communications firm, is being communicating what you do. I have this challenge all the time, but we are a
cobbler's children, isn't
right?
It?
And I'm always happy to be the backup plan, by the way, Steve. So thanks for that.
Mate, we would have you on in an instant.
But the Hill Impact, we're a DC-based global strategic communications firm. Our clients range from large nonprofits to multinational companies. We do have a pretty strong crisis practice, which is what a lot of people know us for. We're making some transitions there, but we help companies and nonprofits meet their goals, and we're really a bottom line oriented firm. We tie every metric to, are we helping you either achieve your mission, bring in revenue, even for nonprofits, or save money? And if we can't tie it to those things, then we consider ourselves out, and we select out. It's never happened, but if it did. So it's all about the bottom line for Hill Impact.
And tell us about your background and what your journey that led you to setting up Hill Impact.
Yeah, it started early on. I studied industrial hygiene and safety, of all things. So I was...
It's quite a good metaphor, actually.
Yeah, it really was. I was going into buildings, like sick building syndrome, ergonomics issues, manufacturing mishaps, and trying to help companies avoid those things. And what I found early in my career is that organizations cared more about compliance when it came to safety than doing the right thing. And so I wanted to help reform OSHA, and so I got involved in politics, and a senator in Washington kind of adopted me and mentored me, and he said, if you really want to make a change, you got to start elevating the conversation and getting away from being in the building and getting in the factory and get to a place where you can really make a difference. So I came to Washington, went back in the state government. So my career has kind of spanned both public and private sector. I ran communications for global companies. I've set up, this is now my third shop. First one, I was too young to know what I was doing, but I was successful. I started a crisis firm and it blew up, and moved to DC, blew up in a good way. We grew too fast, moved to DC, started another one after going back in-house for a number of years. And I started Hill Impact because, quite frankly, and I hate saying negative things about firms that worked for us, but I never found what I was looking for in other firms. So I just made a bunch of notes over 8 years and said, okay, I'm going to go start a firm that does those things. And that's what we do.
And what were the things you think that weren't being supplied by the existing firms? And do you think that's still the case, obviously, apart from Hill Impact?
Sure. And it's things we struggle with. It's the squeaky client gets the oil. It's how do you stay in sync with your clients? I always felt like I had to be jumping up and down and screaming when I was the client to get the attention of my consultants. And they were on receive mode. They were waiting for me to give them orders. That's not what I wanted. I was hiring people to stay current. I wanted their strategic thought. I didn't want to have to call and tell them the latest. I wanted them to already know it. And I struggled with that. And so I wanted a business model where we're embedded with our clients. It's seamless. We got rid of the nice, expensive office. We got a much smaller operating space because we don't have a single client who doesn't want us in their offices. So we go to them and we embed ourselves and we stay current. And we're providing strategic counsel even when they don't ask for it. So that's one of them.
You talked about the business model there. Do you
Sure.
think that almost precludes great service because it's based on hourly billings, or it's based on being reactive rather than coming to you and saying, well, this is what we think you should be doing? Or why is that dynamic not working? And is it all the agency's fault, or is it the client's fault as well? Because they've sort of made them like that.
I think it's a little of both. I think there are clients who think we're better off paying as we go and not going with the retainer model. But the problem with that is they make decisions every day about not including their agency because they don't want to have to spend that amount of money. And so when they do that, then every time they make that decision, the firm is a step or two behind. And then at that point, they're always playing catch up. And so a retainer model or a fee-based model encourages you to abuse the consulting firm, abuse us, which we like. We want them to use us and call us into everything. That's where we add value. But when you run a firm like that, then it becomes a real resource thing. And so what we've had to find are ways to keep track of where we're spending our time, make sure even the clients who aren't asking for our help or don't have issues are still getting our attention, so there's value. And then also finding cost-effective ways to deliver high performance without it being a real resource strain.
It's interesting you say that because we're working on our agency issue, our annual report at the moment. I'm talking to agencies and they were saying similar things, especially in the smaller and mid-sized bracket. They're saying sometimes you have to go over the top for a client and almost, forget about the billings, not totally, but you have to do that extra yard in a way that maybe a holding company firm can't do because their holding company says you've got to make 30% on every single hour that you work, and it just doesn't quite work in that way, which I can see that, and I can see the benefit of that, but also there is a tendency then that maybe the agency gets abused and taken advantage of. So I guess it's a balance, isn't it?
It is a balance, and so what we've been doing a lot of is just making sure that the scope of work really reflects what we're being asked to do, and then if it doesn't, going back to them and making sure that we either adjust that or come up with a project fee for something else. So there has to be that discipline. I am probably the worst business person in America when it comes to maximizing the amount of revenue we could get by client, because I recognize as a smaller firm, we're being hired by multinational, publicly traded companies that can go work with a lot of bigger firms that they have to really see a massive amount of value from us. And I think they do, but it's a real strain on me, for sure.
You are well known in the crisis space, so let's talk a little bit about that. You can't go a day without another business or another individual. Social media has kind of changed that game. It's sped the whole thing up. If we get anyone from Wells Fargo through to Boeing through to Joe Biden, and
Right.
you look at the way Biden sort of his video response last week, it certainly didn't help the situation, and someone should have been giving him better advice than that. What's your take on crisis generally in this modern age where something can just blow up on social and be around the world in seconds?
Yeah, I think so. I have this discussion all the time. One is I don't think there are more crises today. I like to say that crisis is never the crisis. The crisis is what we call the crisis is usually an event that started months ago and was predictable. Almost all crises are predictable. And they start along either it's a cultural issue, it's a governance issue, it's a quality issue. There's something in the organization that created that. What we see and call the crisis is an event. So it could have been prevented. And then the ones that could not have been prevented, they become a crisis because they're so poorly handled. And so I think we've always had this number of incidents that are happening. They're just more exposed today due to social, and there's more accountability, which I think is a good thing for organizations. And what we really need to do is get back to fundamentals. And to me, it always goes back to mission, values. I used to think those things were corny, facilitated exercises in most organizations. The ones I participated in felt forced. Today, I think it's everything. It really comes back to those things and running every decision a brand makes through some kind of filter about its vision and mission.
In the slightly unlikely event that you were advising Joe Biden, that one obviously was going to come out by the sounds of it, and it was released into the ecosphere at a certain point to have maximum impact. How would you have advised him to get ahead of that? One, to get ahead of that issue, and then two, how to handle the response in maybe a slightly more effective way than he and his team did?
Well, I'm not a spend person at all, and I think that everything has to be sincere. He has. The real question is, has he come to terms with this? And I think one of the things that I don't like about the current mode of PR when it comes to crisis is this sense that you have to respond immediately. I think a perfect response sometimes is I'm taking some time. And people need to come to terms. That was my advice to Lance Armstrong. I wasn't advising him. I was talking to his lawyers, and when that whole thing blew up, he didn't need to run on to Oprah. He wasn't ready. He hadn't come to terms with all the things he had done. I hardly doubt that Joe Biden's come to terms with how he may have made people uncomfortable. And so in order to adequately handle the crisis, you got to handle the issue. And so for him, I would have said, hey, let's just say you're going to take a little bit of time. You're going to do some soul searching. You're going to talk to some people. You have a process, and you'll speak when you're ready.
Do you think he made it worse with the video?
Oh, 100% worse. Everything he's done has made it worse.
From just the technical framing of the
Yeah,
video
that was
through
very
the content through.
You just got to turn the phone.
Yeah, it was poorly done. It's interesting. I was rewatching one of President Obama's speeches to the White House Press Association, and he joked about Joe Biden's shoulder rubs, and that was clearly sort of it was a well-known thing in DC, and you could almost see the problem potentially coming up then, but. Yeah, interesting stuff. You often pop up on my Twitter feed in relation to boxing, Dan.
Yeah.
You manage Brooklyn's finest, Heather Hardy, who's a fantastic role model and great individual. Love following what Heather's doing. She's not just boxing, but MMA as well.
Correct.
Tell us, one, how you got into boxing, and two, how did the relationship with Heather sort of start up?
Yeah, and I've always loved boxing, and something that I got into 25 years ago, 30 years ago, in New Mexico, working with some young boxers. And for me, I don't want to make this too long, but I've never been a man of great means. I don't, my philanthropy is through action and through giving, and so our firm probably, most of our billables are actually not billable. We probably do 50% of our hours are pro bono, and that's my way of giving back. And so one of the issues we've taken on is sexual assault. And as a crisis person, there's every day I could be helping a new celebrity or a new high-profile person deal with allegations against them. I've seen what happens with victim blaming and shaming. I see how the victims don't get their same kind of counsel. that that the high profile influential do. And so I wanted to turn the tables, and I wanted to make sure that victims and survivors had that same kind of voice, and Heather's one of those. And I first met her when she first started talking about her story as a survivor 5 years ago, and we've just become very close. We've helped her establish a brand, and then eventually she couldn't find managers she trusted, and I've got a sports and entertainment part of our firm, and I ultimately ended up managing her, and I believe in her, and it's a lot of fun. We're in the middle of culture issues. We're working with. We don't talk about our clients. We don't list them. I think there's some ethics issues there, but every day I'm in the press talking about the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, which is addressing sexual misconduct in sport, and so we're at the forefront of trying to do culture shift, and Heather is one of the great spokespersons for equality, for gender gap issues, for surviving, and it's a real pleasure to work with her.
She's amazing. She's a fantastic role model. I saw her fight, one of her fights in Brooklyn, and she's got an MMA fight coming up next.
She does, right? Yeah, she'll be at MSG on June 14th. We announced it yesterday, fighting in Bellator again.
Yeah.
She's the first athlete, male or female, to have a multi-fight deal in boxing and MMA simultaneously, which we're proud of.
That's a whole interesting space, isn't it? You've got, on the broadcast side, you've got people like DAZN coming in with John Skipper, who used to be president at ESPN. You've got the heavyweight division is sort of a light, although none of them seem to want to fight each other, but it was always thus with boxing, wasn't it? There was the hype around it, the stories, the lines around it. It's a great communications case study in a way, isn't it?
Well, boxing is hundreds of years of tradition uninterrupted by progress. I mean, I'm going to say something that's going to be very unpopular, but with the boxing community, there's a lot of shady people in the business. There's a lot of lack of ethics, and the people who end up suffering are the boxers. They view them as commodities. They don't treat them with respect, and it drives me crazy. And you get these personal vendettas between TV executives and promoters against each other, and they fight over the dumbest things. And who's left there trying to feed their child? Heather. She won a world title in October, still hasn't gotten a fight, and this is the first fight. It's what I like about MMA. It's a lot more transparent, it's a lot more corporate. Bellator's owned by Viacom, and so they treated her very well. Boxing's a different animal.
We could do a whole podcast
I know.
on that, and it'd be kind of interesting as well, but let's
To a
move
few,
on. But
few people it might be.
suffice to say, Heather's amazing, and she's a great role model for women and men, and someone that I love following on Twitter, and great that she's got the support and that she's making progress in her career. It's terrific. Dan, good to chat to you. Let's get on to some topical subjects. Frank, what's this about the HHS suspending the Porter Novelli contract?
Yeah, so this is a temporary suspension of a 7-figure deal that HHS had with Porter Novelli. It's being run through the CMS, which is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And it's being suspended because members of Congress have been questioning whether a CMS administrator was using subcontracts from the Porter Novelli contract to promote herself instead of CMS as a whole or HHS as a whole. So this has been put on hold while the Inspector General's office from HHS looks into it.
So what's the Porter Novelli angle to that? Are they in trouble here, or is it not really relating to them? What's the deal there?
Well, we have to wait and see what the Inspector General decision is and whether the contract continues or anything like that. But it is more about how the subcontracts from the Porter Novelli contract have been used, whether they've been used to promote an individual at CMS, at HHS, or going to promote the federal government's work as a whole.
These are interesting contracts, aren't they, Dan? Because they're often very big contracts, and they do a lot of, in terms of communications. They work. I mean, a lot of the time, if we stop our drink driving campaigns, for example, drink driving deaths go up. go figure. But they can be controversial because a lot of people think that government shouldn't spend money on marketing and communications. You're a DC sort of insider. What's your take on all that?
And I worked for a governor too. I was an executive for a governor, and we would have to hire contractors from time to time. But it's all about the scope of work and keeping it focused on a campaign or an initiative. When it becomes strategic communications counsel to an executive, like a cabinet secretary or someone running a department, I think it becomes very different. And I don't know enough of the facts here, but to me, from an ethics and our, kind of our firm standard is that every subcontractor is part of us, and we own that responsibility. And if a client wants us to use subcontractors in a way that doesn't fit our ethos, our principles, then we don't do it. And so I don't think you can run away from it by simply saying that subcontractors might have done something. If it's your contract, it's your contract. You own it.
Yeah, it's a good point of view, and they get pretty complicated, don't those arrangements? But you've got to take responsibility for it. We don't know what is going on or went on in this particular case. We're talking generally there. Let's talk about Oscar Suris, the former Wells Fargo head of communications. He's obviously had a rough time towards the end of that tenure, and Wells Fargo had a very rough time and continues to. But Oscar's back in the industry, Frank, at Zeno.
That's right. He has taken the job of Executive Managing Director for Crisis and C-Suite Communications at Zeno Group, which of course is our agency of the year.
It is.
Awards.
It is.
And so he is jumping to the agency side. We've had our eye on him for a while in terms of where he was going to land after exiting Wells Fargo last year. Of course, like you mentioned, they had a rough couple of years with the fake account scandal that has been going on for, I think, 3 years now.
They don't seem to be able to put a lid on it either.
No, they don't. They don't. And so he's back on the agency side. It's sort of a third act for Oscar, who was a journalist before he was working for Wells Fargo. So, interesting move.
Yeah, good to see Oscar back in the industry. Dan, it's when a PR person is working for a brand and that brand gets in trouble, it kind of automatically, whether they like it or not, it kind of reflects on them, doesn't it? When it might not be anything to do with them, and then we again talk in the abstract. How do you sort of rebuild your image, or how do you make sure your career isn't ruined by something that might be out of your control, or maybe maybe you didn't handle it as well as you could have done?
I think it gives you an opportunity to showcase how good of a communications person you are, how you handle yourself. And one of my early things when I started my first firm was we were brought in to handle a little issue called Enron. And I just started this little crisis firm, and we get a call and saying, "Can you help Arthur Andersen? It's a small issue. It's Enron. It's Houston. It's probably going to blow over. Can you help out?" We jumped right in. I moved to Houston for basically a year. So that could have, and some people would have said Arthur Andersen went out of business. Does that tar you? No, because I own it. I own what I learned through that. A lot of the mistakes that were made were legal mistakes. But it's totally informed the way that I do crisis communication. And in that case, I learned that a company like Arthur Andersen has been around for over 100 years, has some of the most influential people in every congressional district in America, can go out of business. And they can go out of business because of a crisis. And that is a great case study to tell anyone facing a crisis, to say, this is real. It's serious. And so it's all about how you own what you went through, and including some of the mistakes. And
learn from them. Yeah, it's a good point. And if we're looking at another crisis, United Airlines, you've mentioned this a couple of times, the legal issues sometimes override the communications issues. But in the long run, it's probably better to just actually suck it up and do the right thing, rather than worrying about a potential legal issue down the line, which it's going to happen anyway, which is what happened with United.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up United, because if you think back to the gentleman getting dragged off of the plane, a few days before that, the two girls who were United's response to that was all about policy. We have a policy for dress, we have a policy for this. All they had to do, in this full circle back to values, their own website has values. One of their values, we fly friendly. So I can go to general counsel, outside counsel, and say, I don't need you to fall on your sword, say you made a mistake. All I need you to do is say, we commit to fly friendly. We didn't do that today. How are we going to make sure we do it tomorrow? And that's the mistake these brands are making, big ones, is they don't have, it's not always a legal issue. That's why values and mission are so important, because that's not a legal standard.
Your point is well made, and if thinking about when I was in Davos this year, it was the first time I'd been, but every brand was talking about purpose as being central to their mission. But purpose is more, it's got to be more than a few statements on a website or a few sound bites. You've got to actually behave in line with those principles and be genuine and authentic about it. And that's where the disconnect often seems to lie.
Correct, and I believe in brands in motion, that your brand today is perceived as a shiny object on a hill that you have to protect. I think it should be more fluid. Missions can change, values can change over time. Uber was a disruptive company. That's how they were successful. But they had to transition. Now they're in a very regulated space. What got them to a certain point won't be what sustains them. I wrote a piece for Newsweek about how they don't have a PR issue, they have a cultural issue. So it does come back to that.
Yeah, for sure. Same with Google, Facebook,
Yep.
and companies like that. And those lessons were learned in the past by Microsoft and Apple, so it's not new stuff. So yeah, interesting stuff. Finally, Frank, our brackets.
Yes.
We had a special bracket to mirror the basketball, and we had 64 contenders, and it came down to the final two. Who won?
We had a real down-to-the-wire contest in the final, and a real case of content reflecting life. And the Got Milk slogan barely edged out Nike's Just Do It to cut down the nets, or whatever analogy we want to make here. It was 12 days, 63 matchups, and more than 3,000 votes, and so it was our first inaugural One Shining slogan bracket.
Would you have picked Got Milk?
No, I would have.
I was
picked
amazed.
Nike in the
I
final.
thought Just Do It would easily.
But
do
if
that.
you followed our company bracket, I almost came in last. So I'm not exactly an expert on this. I took Buffalo to go to the Elite Eight, which was an ill-considered thing in retrospect, and Wisconsin, which was out in the first round.
Yeah, I was,
So-
when I was watching the video of the Got Milk campaign, it was it was Alexander Hamilton was
Yeah.
a key part of it, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
And it's kind of well before the hype around the show and everything like that, that was a part of that.
It's
so.
a funny commercial.
Yeah.
It's a funny commercial going back more than 20 years.
You could do a Got Milk commercial now, Frank, with your
Could I?
beards, couldn't you?
Well,
You
I
know,
don't know.
there was the old line about getting milk in your beard.
Was there?
Could be an opportunity for you there, my friend.
Did you say you had Wisconsin though in the basketball?
I had Wisconsin to the Elite Eight. I had Buffalo to the Elite Eight. These things made sense in retrospect. They just don't make much sense.
Well, if you had
No.
Wisconsin, you had Got Milk to a certain extent.
There you
so
go.
What do you think of these are kind of iconic taglines, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's a bit of fun, obviously, but how important are they in a company? You know, we talked about their mission, and etc. I mean, Just Do It did define Nike.
Sure.
And still does, doesn't
And
it?
it still does. And I think that there's a different category when you get to that iconic stage. Nike's and that very few companies get there. I think taglines, I know I overthink them. Lots of people overthink. It's subjective to a certain. It's all about to me, you know, the best tagline in the world, but if you don't live up to it or you don't make it really a part of who you are, then it's going to fall flat. So it's really about the actions.
Yeah, for sure.
So we should point out, Got Milk beat the following slogans on the way to the title. Probably the best beer in the world, which is Carlsberg, right? And there's a story about that. They can't say it's the best beer in the world, but they can say probably
Yeah,
the
and they
best
have
beer in the
some
world.
really funny, creative
Yeah.
executions behind it.
The best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup. I won't sing it. I'm sorry, everybody.
Yeah.
We want Frank to sing.
No.
Yeah.
No, this bud's for you, and what happens here stays here for Las Vegas,
Vegas,
of course.
yeah.
So,
Actually, Got Milk did change attitudes. Milk was a sort of outdated concept, was it? When I was at school, we used to get half a bottle of milk at break time. You know, That's how I grew up big and strong, Frank. I've totally wasted that good start in life, but it did change attitudes to milk, didn't it? And it really did do a job. Whether it was beyond just do it, I don't know. But our bracket, our readers voted, and that's
congratulations to them, and the trophy's in the mail.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And thank you to Mickey Brown for doing that, man behind the dials. Great piece of work. Thanks, Dan, for joining us. Great chat.
Yeah, I loved it.
Good luck to Heather in her fight.
Yeah.
And you said you were going to be controversial. What happened?
Well, I have more to say. But
Leave us with a controversial thought to
okay,
the
here's
podcast.
one. Stop doing unpaid internships to everyone in the industry. I think that it's got to change. If you want to change diversity in the workplace, it starts there. And the way that you do it is by giving everyone an opportunity. My daughter works in communications in the NBA for a team, and when she was getting started, almost all these internships, they were working 60 hours, very little. She had the means to do that. Lots of people don't have the means to do it, which means they miss out on that first opportunity, which means they don't get that first paying job. And so it really starts there, and there are too many PR firms, communications firms doing unpaid internships because the market will allow it. And we have to change that.
That's a good point. I agree with that. And also this sort of friends and family internship syndrome,
Yes.
where, kids who maybe need a leg up are not getting the opportunities because those places have already been filled by people, friends of family in the company, etc. But it sounds to me like you're doing unpaid work. So aren't you sort of breaking your own rule?
I'm the intern. Yeah. I don't have my interns go get my lunch. I take them to lunch. I mean, it's a very different thing. I think they would like me to pay them even more, but we pay them. And but yes, I'm doing a lot of unpaid work, and probably too much, but it's what I have to give.
Well, you love what you're doing, obviously.
I do. I love it.
Yeah, well, we pay our interns. I can say that. So I agree with you.
I should have checked with you first.
Yeah, luckily we did. I mean, I think a lot of organisations kind of take, especially some. I'm nothing against the NBA, but and I don't even know if they do pay. But some
do and some don't.
Yeah, I used to do journalism for a soccer outlet, and they didn't pay. People went and worked there for nothing.
Well, there was an attitude that your pay was your clips.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you got clips out of it, and that was what you were supposed to be doing.
But they were running a business, and they were making good revenues on the back of the content. So yeah. Anyway, thanks, Dan. It was good fun to chat. Thanks for coming in at short notice. Don't forget the Brand Film Festival in New York City on May the 2nd. It's at the Paley Centre for Media. Going to be a great evening of film and fun. Global Awards, they're in London on May 21st. Hope to see as many of you as possible there. And our Hall of Fame for PR Week is going to be in June 6th, I believe, in New York again. And our conference is going to be in Chicago, October 19th. It's all about purpose. It's called PR Decoded, Purpose Principles. So lots more to come on that. But that's all we got time for. We'll see you next time on the PR Week.